all I saw was my hurt and my pain. And the Lord just let me have that time. But when he said it was time to forgive and go all in, then it was like, I trust that you're going to be with me in this.
Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of the Anything But Quiet Time podcast. We're Rachelle and Carder, joined by our good friend and part of our radio show that we do, Reyna. And this is exciting. Actually, you told us a great story a few months ago of something that you do, and we're like, hey, we need to have you on.
We do. You took all the things I was going to say.
There's a lot of things to fill in.
But Reyna's so amazing, and we don't have enough time to go into all of that. But one of my favorite parts of her story, and maybe you might bring a little bit of that up, is that prison ministry wasn't necessarily something as a little girl, I would imagine, you thought, I'm going to do this. This is something that over time, God has encouraged you going, nobody else can share what you share and be received the way it's going to be received. I'm calling you to do this. And we just kind of sit back in awe of the God stories that come out of your experiences. And I know we're both really excited. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's something I never imagined that I would do. I didn't even know that people did this. So I grew up watching my dad go in and out of prison. And when I was a little girl, one of my earliest memories of what that looked like was my mom was like, Mija, get ready. We're going to go see your dad. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was really young. And so she braided my hair and I got all dolled up and I was so excited because I adored my dad. He was the parent that if I was ever in trouble, he's like, Mija didn't do it. Leave her alone. And he was always the life of the party, made jokes. So I loved being around my dad. And so I hadn't seen him for a while. So when my mom said that we're going to go see him, I'm like, let's go. I'm excited. We get to this building that I had never seen before. We're standing in this long line and nobody looks happy to be in this long line. And I'm excited because I'm like, I'm seeing my dad today.
Yeah.
And then finally we get to this room and this room is like divided by this big like glass wall type thing.
Like a divider or
yes,
something?
like a divider.
Okay.
And on one side, there are people dressed in normal clothes like me and my mom. And on the other side, there are men all dressed in like a uniform, like a white uniform. And I'm like, what? Where is my dad and what is this place? Yeah. And then finally, I see my dad come out on the other side of that big glass wall. And I'm like, hey, Dad, I'm waving real big. And my dad has this big smile on his face. And like I said, my dad was the life of the party, right? So it wasn't a surprise to me that when he walked out, all the other guys walked out by themselves, but not my dad. My dad walked out with friends. He had an officer on his left and one on his right. And so I'm just like waving and he's not waving back at me. And as he gets closer, I realize it's because his hands are handcuffed behind his back. And as he gets closer, I can hear and see the chains on his feet. And then it's like all hitting me, like, what is this place? And then I see those guards that are on both sides of him, put him in this cage that's across from me on the other side of that glass wall. And before they can take those chains off of him, they had to lock that cage. And in that moment, as a little girl, like 7 or 8, I drop my head into my hands and I just start sobbing uncontrollably. Because this was my dad who I adored and there was nothing I could do to help him. I felt absolutely helpless in that moment. And I remember my dad just squeezing up as close to that glass as he could. And he's like, Mija, no llores, don't cry. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. But it wasn't okay. Because after a 2-hour visit and some stale chips from a vending machine, I had to go home to a life without him. And it was that throughout my childhood, and my dad coming out, being a part of my life, and it being a great time. And then I'd inevitably get a call that he was in trouble again. And so he'd go back, and we kind of did this for a while. But then in my young adult years, I was making my way through college, he had got released. And I was so excited. By this time, I had 2 little girls, and I thought, you know what? You weren't always able to be there when I was a little girl, but now he's older, that crazy lifestyle's behind him, and you are just going to be the best grandpa to my 2 daughters. And he absolutely was. I have pictures of him at birthday parties, blowing out the candles on the cake, and like he was just the life of the party at family events, and it was a good time, but it didn't last. So I'm making my way through college and I get a call from my tia and she says, Mija, did you hear the news? And I said, what? She said, your dad's been picked up. He's on parole. It doesn't look good. I said, what? She said, well, look, he has a court date coming up and it looks really good to the judge if there's family there supporting him. So show up for your dad. And so I did what I knew to do.
Do you mind me asking,
Not
was
at all.
this your dad's sister that called?
My dad's sister.
Okay.
Yes, it was my dad's sister. And so I did what I knew to do. I got all dressed up and I showed up to that courtroom and I watched my dad fight for his life and he got handed a 35-year sentence. At this point in his life, he's in his 50s. So you do the math on 35 years plus 50. In that moment, again, now as an adult, I drop my head into my hands and I'm sobbing. But I also made a decision and I was really proud of myself for finally having the courage to make the decision. And it was that I was done. I went home and I got out a piece of paper and a pen and I wrote a letter, just basically telling my dad off and telling him what a disappointment he was to me, but now also to his granddaughters. I told him, don't ever expect another letter from me. Don't expect a visit. I am done. And that was a promise I made to myself. Never again would I go into a prison. Tell God what you're not going to do. So whenever I made new friends, after that time, I didn't tell anybody about my dad that was away in prison serving a 35-year sentence. When I got to KSBJ, where the cream of the crop Christians were, I couldn't tell any of the good Christians that I had a dad that was incarcerated.
By the way, that's sarcasm. So we work at a radio station, KSBJ. You may already know that, but you discovered when you worked here, there were just human beings
Yeah,
here.
human beings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not cream of the crop.
No, human beings.
Did you just?
Did you
You just found out.
Human beings that deal with real life struggles, but love Jesus with all your hearts. And I was like, I belong there. This is where I belong. And things were going really good at work. I was like, I never thought I would be here. Things were going so great. And one day I am driving home and I'm in, we live in Houston. Traffic is just sometimes at a standstill, and that's what it was. And I'm worshiping and I'm just talking to God, and things were going so good in my life that I said a real dangerous prayer. I said, Lord, whatever you ask me to do in this life, I'm going to do it because I know you're real and I trust you. And in that moment, I thought he was going to call me to do something great and exciting, but he put the very thing on my heart that I did not want to do. And it's time to go see your dad. It had been 5 years since I had written that letter promising I would never do it. But knowing that it's what God had wanted me to do, I showed up to that prison and my dad was like shocked to see me. He gave me a big hug. He was crying. I was crying. He's like, Mija, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're here. And I said, Dad, don't thank me. Thank God. Like God's the reason that I'm here. And so a lot of healing happened. And and then doors opened for me to do prison ministry. So it's what I do.
We're going to get into one specific story about that, but I just want to ask one part about when you wrote the letter, the 5 years before you saw your dad again, you were a Christian at this time.
I was.
Right? And so, because I think that's just the natural thing. I mean, obviously, it's like he doesn't owe you anything anymore. He's blown it enough times.
And when you say natural thing, you mean that would be the natural inclination?
Yeah.
To just write the letter.
Yeah. It's a human reaction.
I'm glad you're asking her about this part because that stood out to me too.
And so what did you feel? Because I think it's one of those, whether it's prisons involved or not, somebody's hurt me enough times and this is how I'm going to react. What was that conflict of faith in you at that time? Or did you just kind of, put the blinders up, or did you feel God was having you write that letter? I'm curious about that part of it, because obviously you did a 180 later. So.
Yeah. So I was in the beginning stages of rededicating my life to Jesus. And I'm so grateful that when we give our lives to Jesus, it's not like, okay, you're healed and like everything is just cleaned up and you're just, super Christian. Like, no, God had to work a lot out of me. And thankfully he did it so gently and kind and compassionately. But I would say, the blinders were up. All I saw was my hurt and my pain. And it was like, I just need to be away from this. And the Lord just let me have that time. And I'm thankful that he did. But when he said it was time to forgive and go all in, then it was like, all right, God, I'm grown enough in my walk with you that I trust that you're going to be with me in this. Because it could have went bad. It could have went real bad when I got there. And even if it would have, God was holding my hand through it.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about it, you said, I'm really proud of myself for making that choice. Yeah. If somebody might find themselves in a similar circumstance, whether it's an incarceration situation or it's just an abusive type situation, whatever it might be, a negative relationship, how would you give advice if they came to you and said, Reyna, when the boundaries, what's a healthy one? Why did you determine this? Because you were proud of yourself in the moment, and you're also grateful that God gave you that period of time. But as Carder was bringing up your faith part of it, and you're like, I'm growing in that. That's a hard one to balance out.
Yeah, I was proud of myself in that moment because it was like I kept setting myself up to be hurt, and I didn't want to set up myself to be hurt anymore. I don't know if it would be proud now that I know what I know and now that I am where I am.
But you understand why you did it, obviously.
I understand it. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think what you said before makes sense with it is that we've talked about this before. We've had people ask, aren't you like a new creation right off the bat? And I think we're always in process.
Yes.
We're always growing.
Yes.
A fine wine doesn't taste really good right away. You have to age that thing, right?
Tim Keller, the late pastor Tim Keller said, we are just like Jesus wasn't sinful, but he became sin. He was seen as sin. So as we are, we don't necessarily become righteous. We're seen as righteous. And he said, something to the effect of this conversation of, will I become a better person? I think so. I hope so. He was just kind of like, I don't know about that part, but it's Christ's sacrifice in that moment. And that kind of speaks to your cream of the crop Christians too.
Yeah.
I think when we see people like that, and especially for people that act that way, holier than thou, they don't realize even their societally acceptable sins are an offense to a holy God and an eternal separation from God without the righteousness of Jesus. And so the extreme situation of what your dad has gotten into compared to somebody who has, a everyday addiction, is really still separating themselves from God and needs the forgiveness of Jesus.
And just for clarification, Dad kept going back because he kept getting himself back in trouble.
Yeah, trouble with the law, bad decisions.
So then something else, God's really good at this stuff. He's really good at this stuff. I want you to do prison ministry.
Yeah. So,
and you were like, yes, fully embracing.
I was terrified, but when God, I don't know how to explain it, but when he puts something on your heart to do, you just do. For me, I've learned to just do it afraid and just do it. And so like the first prison I walked into, I was so scared. My knees were literally shaking. Sure. I was thinking in my mind, how do I back out of this? How do I tell the person that is, invited me to speak, hey, I'm not doing this. I feel like I'm going to fall apart right now. I was already trying to think of how I was going to get out of it. And then I get into this room and in walk the women that I'm going to speak to. And I didn't see criminals. I saw moms, I saw daughters, I saw friends, nieces, aunts. And I just something inside me exploded like, I need to tell them about Jesus. And then that's just so God.
Yeah.
Because if you would have asked Reyna, would you go put yourself in that room? Absolutely not. but God put me there, and then I came alive. So yeah, fast. Yes.
Well, obviously what got us to sit here today is one specific story. You have countless, and you sing and
they're
you share
all
your story. And it's sometimes you're in the on the yard, the prison yard. This is men's and women's prisons that you
Last
go
time
to.
she got to play ball with one of them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
we
Okay.
have.
Got to play ball.
So what happened in this recent story that was just mind blowing?
All right. So fast forward a lot of years. COVID hits. All the prison ministry stuff stops because,
Right.
there's COVID. And I had a lot of stuff happening in my personal life that I didn't pick up prison ministry. I just kind of left it to the side. And I walked through a divorce. And it was the night that I realized that it was going to end in divorce. And for anybody who has experienced that, that it is excruciatingly painful. I was on my bathroom floor, devastated, crying out to God. But at the same time, I had all these real thoughts, human thoughts coming to my mind of how to handle the situation, how to make myself feel better, how to just things that were not of God. And I'm thinking of all these things. I'm like, okay. And then I realized, wait, Reyna, if you believe the whole God thing, you can't do any of these crazy things you're thinking about. And it was like in that moment, I was like, all right, God. And I trust you. I give this all to you. And I got up from that bathroom floor that day, a new woman, just completely reliant on the grace of God. But I was like, okay, what now? Because I don't want to spend all my time in bed crying. I don't want to be sad anymore. What do I do with my time? And I just felt like the Lord was like, serve others. Do what you tell other people to do when they're struggling. You serve others. And so I reached out to my friends that did prison ministry. And I said, hey, if there's any availability, I'd love to serve. Mind you, no one in my world, in my life, knows what's happening behind closed doors. And they were like, sure. Well, actually, we have some room for you to come with us to California. I had never been to California before. These were some of the toughest yards like in the country. And here I was going to go, like dealing with all this heartache and pain. I found myself standing on a level 4 prison yard in California, looking into the eyes of these men that desperately needed hope.
It needs to be said, Reyna, you're 4'11".
Yes, I am. I'm a little thing.
And these guys are, you think about the big and tough and rumble guys.
And they are. And some of them, there you are.
But what they say, to earn respect, go punch the toughest one right in the face on your first day. That's what they say.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Well, that's
I didn't do that.
Who's they? But I think because it was Jesus through you, the stories I've heard coming out of California in these visits, you could hear a pin drop. That little thing up there is speaking things that are moving heaven and earth in their lives.
Yeah. And I guess in a way, like if I'm real, it was personal. It was personal against the enemy. It was like, you want to mess with me? Here I come. And I just shared my heart, and I shared what I had been through. And I remember one yard that I was on, I shared, and then the men are invited to come up. There's a team of volunteers that go with me, and the men can come up to know more about Jesus. And like, they just like all started coming up. We just had such a big response. And
then, kind of scary at first, but you were, did you feel that way?
Well, I had a space on the side with one of the guards. So I walked to the side, and I see them all come up. And then the volunteers tell me, like, Reyna, there's a story of this guy that he told us he always leaves the yard. Anytime that he sees like a ministry or anybody try to come in, he leaves the yard. But he said, because I saw you and, I'm a Latina, I'm Hispanic. He's like, I wanted to know what you had to say. And once I started telling the story, he's like, I had to finish hearing it. And he gave his life to Jesus that day. And another man was like, I'm not into this whole Jesus thing. I'm into Scientology, but I know your story's true. And he gave his life to Jesus that day. And I am just like bawling. I go to the side and I am just crying. And I just was telling God, that was all you, God. That was not me. That was all you. So it's quite the adventure. following Jesus.
So many things though working there. You know, we even talked about this a little bit today on our radio show about when you find yourself in a place that is not great, to praise. Micah Tyler sings a song about when the devil come get me, I'm going to praise the Lord. And I'm like, well, is there ever a time where he doesn't? You know, you're to put on the whole armor of God. And so if you do that, then you're anticipating warfare daily, not necessarily that you're going to be on the offense. That's not for us. That's God. But you'll always be on the defense. And if you ever have to be on the offense, you brought the word of God into play. It's not like, hey, I'm going to show you, devil. No, it's like God's word. Booyah. Did I just say that?
Booyah. God's word. Booyah.
Talk about booyah.
My
That
children
needs to be on
just
a
now
shirt.
cringed and that is unforgivable. I do
Mom.
apologize.
Mom. Yeah.
But I think it's amazing that in those moments where you could have done the thing, because I think even just hearing about your crumpled state on the bathroom floor, about where you were with the walking through the divorce and realizing, oh my gosh, it's come to this. I just like animals, we go to that place of like self-protection, licking the wound. I'm going to figure out what's going to make this feel better.
Yeah.
And you didn't choose to do that.
I couldn't.
You did, because your whole life, Reyna, you made choices to hold your life loosely. And so I think that's also huge. It's like, how do I get to that place where I can make those choices that easily? Little by little by little, because if you hadn't been making those choices all the way, I don't know that you would have come out the other side swinging the same way. But because you continue to releasing that relationship with Dad, making the choice you told me to go to the prison to visit, I'm going to do that. And little by little, and you're told often, you know, you'll find out what's in people in their most traumatic moments because it'll just spill out. And trust was what came out of yours.
Yeah. And it had to be me reminding myself of all the things I had seen God do in my life before then. It's like, I can't deny that God did that.
So good.
I can't deny that God was faithful there.
Amen.
And so I was like, all right, God, you're all I got.
Yeah. Well, now that the newness has worn off about prison ministry specifically, what do you find is the most difficult thing about it? Maybe it's maybe it's just the travel, or maybe it's procedural. Maybe it's people that choose to not come hear your story. They got nothing else to do, but you find people that just don't want to even hear it. What is the most difficult thing about it ongoing?
I would say the tangible feeling of the spiritual warfare when you are on the ground. Like you can feel the thickness in the air and just staying prayed up and fighting through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that would be, is that the answer
That's a
you're
great
looking
answer,
for?
yeah.
That's a good answer.
I don't think you know what my wife went to India a few years ago, and just a lot of, with that, it was darkness and some witchcraft and stuff like that. And she hadn't seen it felt it quite like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably a similar thing of, you don't really know the environment until you really get in there and feel it. And the fact that it's tangible in that way.
When you volunteer, and every experience is going to be different, especially when you saw, I was picturing those women with you when you were walking in there trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of this? Which, by the way, thank you for being so honest, because I was like feeling butterflies in my stomach while you were saying that, because I've been there where you're doing the thing. I'm like, why am I here again?
I'd rather be at home in my PJs.
How did I get into this in the first place? And, but it's like, it's easy. There are going to be days where it's easy to give somebody a cup of water when they come thirsty. And if they came into the room, that means they wanted to be there. They're not forced to go to the room, right?
Right.
They can go because they choose to go.
Yes.
But there are going to be those volunteer experiences, which is why I'm kind of glad you asked that, where that one guy was in the room, and the only reason why he saw you, it was the color of your skin that got you a foot in the door with him. God will use anything, and I love that he doesn't waste anything. But there's also people that are trying to volunteer and trying to love on people, and they just feel like they're hitting that brick wall day after day, and they're not seeing maybe the fruit, where these guys gave their lives to Jesus on the spot. How would you encourage people volunteering in a space that maybe they're not seeing it?
I would say the same thing that I tell myself, is that it's not about me. It's not about me. I'm not called to be successful. I'm called to be obedient, is a quote that I've heard. And I loved that. Yeah. So I'm doing my part. God, what happens is yours.
This is great. Thank you. This is a great, a lot of stuff we didn't even know, I think. And so a lot of great insight into the world of what you're doing. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you guys for having me.